I'm Ryan from ExtremeTerrain.com, and this is my review of the Fox 2.0 Performance Series Reservoir Shock, fitting all 2007 to 2016 JKs. There's a version of this shock available for those of you with 1.5 to 3.5 inches of lift, and those of you with the taller lifts of 4 to 6 inches, and of course these are available for both the front and the back of your JK. These are for those of you who want some of the highest quality shocks available. The fact that this is a reservoir shock means that you get the maximum amount of cooling, which will decrease cavitation and shock fade and also increase the life of the shock. The reservoir also means that they can pack the largest extended length into the smallest compressed length, giving you as much shock travel as possible. The fact that this is a nitrogen-charged Fox shock means that you're going to get a really great ride as well. However, all of those things wrapped into one are going to come at a cost. These are certainly not going to be the most budget-friendly shock available, but you do get a lot of features for what you pay. Now, like I said, this is a Fox Performance 2.0 nitrogen-charged shock. Now, there are really two major types of shocks. One is hydraulic and the other is nitrogen. All shocks have a fluid inside of them, and when you work the shock really hard over a long period of time, you can end up with some cavitation and some bubbling, which will eventually cause shock fade. The nitrogen charge inside of a nitrogen shock is there to decrease that cavitation and decrease the shock fade. Now, a nitrogen shock can ride a little bit harder than a hydraulic shock, so that's something to keep in mind as well. The fact that this has an external reservoir is there to eliminate that shock fade even further by providing the maximum amount of cooling and the maximum amount of fluid inside of the shock. Now, the shock itself is a 6061 T6 aluminum, and the shock shaft inside of the piston is a 5/8 inch hardened chrome-plated steel. The shock has rubber bushings throughout, and this thing is really designed to take a beating. The fact that it's a reservoir shock means that you can run high-speed washboards out in the desert and do desert racing without having any sort of shock fade. And the fact that this is built so well means that it's going to last a really long time and, again, take a beating. Getting these shocks installed on your Jeep is a really simple process because these are designed to bolt right in place of your factory shocks, so there's no need to cut or drill anything or install any sort of aftermarket shock mount. These even include an aluminum mount for the reservoir, so you can bolt the reservoir right onto the body of the shock, meaning you don't have to fabricate anything or strap anything up out of the way. To get these installed, all you need to do is remove the factory bolts holding your factory shocks in place and put the new shocks in their place using that factory hardware. There's no need to jack up the Jeep to remove any springs or control arms or track bars or anything like that. It may help to remove a tire to give you some additional room, but even that isn't 100% necessary. Now, anytime I'm doing any suspension work on a JK, the most difficult nut to remove is the front upper shock nut. So I would definitely recommend spraying that with a good penetrating oil well before you get started. It's a tight location, so there isn't a lot of room to get wrenches in there, and if you do have rust, you can't get a cutoff wheel in there to cut the top of the shock off. So that's the only area that you may run into a little bit of trouble, but again, spraying it with a good penetrating oil well before you get started will definitely help. Now, getting these installed won't take very long. I would recommend setting yourself up for about an hour to change all 4 of these shocks, but again, if you do have a little bit of additional rust, that may take a little bit longer. And you won't need any specialty tools to get that done, just a socket set and some wrenches. Now, anytime you do any sort of suspension work, it's always recommended that you flex out the suspension and make sure that you're not bottoming out or having any sort of clearance issues. A fast way to destroy a new shock is to have it bottom out completely. Your bump stops are there to keep the shock from bottoming out. So when you install these, you will want to flex the suspension and make sure that you have plenty of bump stop in place so you don't damage your new shocks. Now, as far as the price of these shocks, these are expensive. There's no two ways about it. In my opinion, if you're going to use the shock for what it was built for, it's definitely worth the money. Again, this is designed for high-speed desert racing over the washboards where you need the additional cooling provided by a reservoir and the longest travel that you can get. If you need that and something that can definitely take a beating, these are worth the price. If you're more of the casual off-roader or your Jeep stays on the street, I don't think that it's necessary to spend the type of money for a shock that offers all of the features this one does. Fox has other shocks that, in my opinion, are a better fit, and they're also going to save you some money. Some guys out there just really like the look of a reservoir shock. And again, if you have the budget for it, go for it. But in my opinion, there are ways to save some money and still get an excellent ride. So there are a couple of reasons to be looking at a new set of shocks, whether you just installed a lift kit and you need some longer shocks, or you're just looking to replace the ones that are already on your lifted Jeep. And if you're somebody who goes out and works your shock really hard over washboards at high speed, and you find yourself having a ton of shock fade and looking for a reservoir shock because it runs cooler and the other features that this shock has, I would definitely recommend taking a look at this one. It's very well built, and I honestly don't see any room for improvement with it. However, if you're just looking for a better ride on the trail and on the street, and you're not going to be using this shock for what it's built for, then I would recommend taking a look at one of our other shocks available or one of the other shocks that Fox offers, because it will save you some money. So that's my review of the Fox 2.0 Performance Series Reservoir Shock, fitting all 2007 to 2016 JKs, that you can find right here at ExtremeTerrain.com.